Om Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmatacharya Paryandam Vande Guru Parambaram. Shruti Smriti Purananamalayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Logashankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutrabhashyakrito Vande Bhagavando Punah Punah Stapakaya Dharmasya Sarvadharmaswarupine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namah Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Jnanarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddharbhavatu Me Sada Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nandagopakumaraya Govindaya Namo Namah Krishna Krishna Hare Krishna Sarvajñatvam Prasidame Rama Ramana Vishvesha Vidyamashu Prachame Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavadhidamastu Ma Vidushavahe Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om to each one of you. Now we are going through the Prakarana Grandham Atmabodha. Before we get into the 67th verse of Atmabodha, we are almost nearing to the end of this introductory text. One of the profound compositions of Jagadguru Adi Shankaracharya. Let me try to set a context before we get into the 67th sloka of Atmabodham. Atmabodham is all about the journey from gross to subtle. When I say gross to subtle, from the plane of objects to the subject, from the plane of gross to subtler. When I say gross to subtler, subtler has got more possibilities. Subtle one is having an infinite scope, whereas the gross is something that is more limited. For example, name and form, or name or form. It has got limitations. Whereas subtle, when we say subtle, the energy within, or the consciousness force, consciousness energy, we can see that that is the synonym of expansiveness. So subject or the plane of spirit is the plane of expansion, whereas the plane of names and forms, the plane of objects, is very limited. And when we say the plane of object, again this is the gross, the plane of gross. The plane of gross is the plane of bondage, because that is where the transactions happen. The objective world transactions happen at the plane of gross, and that is the plane that we get the bondage. And if you see the subtler plane, the plane of subtle is the plane of freedom. And if you see the gross plane, the plane of objects, that is the plane for having the sensual pleasures. When I say sensual pleasures, we interact in this world through the sensory organs, and we have these senses working towards different sensory perceptions in the form of shabdam, sparsham, rupam, rasam, gandha. Again, vaka, pani, padam, payu, upastha. So that is where these sensual pleasures, when we say the plane of gross, the sensual pleasures are indulged in that plane. And what happens when we invoke these sense organs? When we say the sense, the pancha karmendriyam, the pancha jnanendriyam, and the andhakaranam, what happens? The mental energy is consumed, because mental energy is needed for involving in the interactions. For example, if you taste something, there is an involvement of the mental energy. And again, when the taste is received or when the taste is felt, again the comparisons will start. This is better than that, or compared to the last time, the taste is not that great. Correct? So the mental energy is occupied when we are dealing with the sensory pleasures and at the plane of the gross. And we will also have the preoccupation with the pleasures. Correct? And whereas at the plane of subtle is the plane of happiness. And what is happening in all of us? Our mind is totally conditioned over many years of different influences, and mind has created a kind of understanding that these temporary, finite and limited objects that I deal with on a daily basis are the ones who give pleasure and happiness to me. That is why we do transactions. That is why we do different actions. Because mind inherently has got a wrong impression that when I execute actions, when I do the finite, temporary, limited objects or the transactions based out of those things, I get happiness, I get, the kind of satisfaction. That is why sometimes we do karma, right, and with certain expectation, and when we are not getting those results, we get depressed, or sometimes we get very much happy, elevated. But when we look into ourselves, are we able to understand that when we go or when we do a deeper investigation, are we able to understand that the deeper aspects, the deeper and subtler aspects in us are the true source of great joy and happiness rather than the objective world transactions and the results coming out of that? When we do a deeper investigation, we will understand that. See, one big example itself is the state of deep sleep that we have in life. Daily basis we are having this. And there is no situation like let me not sleep because it's a daily affair and I am also getting bored. There is no such situation anywhere. Even if someone offers you to become head of a country with a condition that you should not sleep, maybe 1 or 2 days we will try to explore, and try to utilize, but after a few days you will understand that it doesn't make any sense, because what I need is the happiness, and we are getting that on a daily basis from the deep sleep. That is what is happening. There is no objects in the deep sleep. Every objects are getting dissolved or plunged into the subject, but there is ignorance prevailing there. But what is happening is we are with the Nijasthiti, with the true self, and that true self is the embodiment of bliss. That is where we are having Anandam in the deep sleep. And Upanishad says this as the Turiya Avastha, or the consciousness, the state of consciousness. In fact, there is no separate Turiya Avastha. Turiya means the inherent nature of all the avasthas, be it the Jagrat, be it the Swapnam, be it the Sushupti. There is no separate dimension or a reality called Turiyam. The Turiyam is implied, Turiyam is inherent. Because in that consciousness, every states, be it Jagrat, Swapnam, Sushupti, all these three states run. But the influence of objects are much more in the awakened state, in the Jagrata Avastha. And in the Swapna Avastha, the influence of Prapancham, the influence of Prapancham in a dormant fashion is not there, but the mind is still active, because all the projections of the mind in that consciousness becoming active in the Nidra Avastha. And in the deep sleep, what is happening? Everything is absent. Everything is getting immersed into that reality, into the subject. All objects are getting immersed into the subject. So what Atmabodham says is, seek the subtler dimension of your true self. Don't get carried away with the gross aspect. It is also again important to understand another dimension. When we say the subtler dimension, we all say that I know I exist. I know I exist. How do you know? Do you need a mirror? Do you need somebody from outside and say, hey, you exist? Or you hear sound. Now you are able to hear what we are discussing. How do you know this? Maybe I can say that, yeah, now you all are listening, but beyond those words, you are aware of the fact that you are listening, you are able to hear. Or if we say that, yeah, I am a bit ignorant about all those happenings, right? I am not sure about what is that, or I am a bit ignorant about certain skills. It doesn't need a certificate that, certificate says you failed. Otherwise also you will be able to know that, yeah, I am not really good, I am not so strong. So how do you know? How do you know that you exist? How do you know that you are hearing sound? How do you know that you are skillful? How do you know that you are ignorant? Because fundamentally you exist. Fundamentally we all exist. And whatever is there within the existence, whatever dimensions you can bring, be it silence, be it joy, be it emotions, be it thoughts, be it anxieties, those are instantly known to you, because you yourself is the existence principle. Means you are the Sat Vastu. So you exist, Sat, and you are also conscious about. You exist and you are also conscious about. So Sat and Chit, this you cannot deny. You yourself cannot deny the fact that you are conscious of your existence. Can you deny that? So your existence, consciousness doesn't need any sort of affirmation. No one from outside should come and tell you that you exist and that is why you have this consciousness, because you don't need any special help. You don't need to go to the mirror and see whether you exist or not. That's why in the beginning I said, bring the attention to your spiritual heart. Bring the attention to your center, where you feel the spandanam, where you feel you exist. That is not the heart pumping heart. Existence itself is your identity. And that existence, is that a gross principle or a subtle principle? So it cannot be objectified, right? So because we exist, we are conscious of ourselves. This itself is coming one step before the doer of objectification. Meaning, this itself is the first step before anything starts emanating, be it the spandanam in the mind, be it the trigger happening in the mind. For example, when we get up, when we wake up in the morning, initially everything was fresh, blank, and the mind starts becoming active. That is where the feeling of I is also creeping in. So, point here is, the existence itself is our identity, and this cannot be objectified, and this is the step which is before the doer of objectification comes into picture. If that is the state, then you are the subtle principle. Your true identity is the subtle principle. So what one has to do, one has to abide, one has to adore. What to adore? That I am the existence principle, I am the consciousness principle, I am the subtlest principle, I am not the gross. And Vedanta says this subtle principle is the Brahman. And knowing Brahman is becoming Brahman. Knowing this principle is all about becoming that principle, abiding in that principle. Brahma with Brahmaiva Bhavati. So, the knower of Brahman identifies his or her existence in the deeper recess of one's inner self. And it doesn't mean that the knower of Brahman will live in a different way and get rid of all the transactional things which are destined to happen. This is all about gaining the right understanding. It's all about drifting the understanding from the objective plane, maybe we can say the gross plane, to the subtle plane. When I say drifting the understanding, drifting the assumed identity that one has gained. Assumed identity towards what? Assumed identity towards the gross plane. Drifting from there, taking a U-turn and come back to the core, come back to the subtler plane, come back to the core. You are not the matter principle, you are the consciousness principle. Satyam Jnanam Anandam Brahma. That is what Upanishad says. And this Brahman is the great silence. It doesn't mean that the silence is something void. It will have all possibilities, all logical conceptions. And it is beyond the characteristics of the words that we can use. Beyond. Vajoha vajam savu pranasya prana. Or vajo vibhandi niglayad anugrahena. It is beyond all the verbal characterization and the words that we can make to express or to describe. So in fact, no words or no statements are adequate to describe the Brahman, to describe this principle. And human notions, including the subtle mind, cannot comprehend or cannot penetrate into the realm of the Brahman, because it is beyond and it is behind the mind. That's why I said, beyond the influence of the doer of the perceptions coming, meaning the ego coming into picture. Where the ego comes in the mind. It is the step which is much before. So for knowing this is all about surrender the mind. Knowing this truth is all about use the yukti and swanubhava. Yukti is all about I cannot be the changing objects, I cannot be the three avasthas, I cannot be the different bodies like Annamayam, Pranamayam, Manomayam, Vijnanamayam, Anandamayam. I cannot be the Andhakaranam. So one has to do the Mananam. Out of the Sravanam, one has to do the Yukti Vijaram, the Mananam. And once the mind is purified, the clarity will evolve and will be able to transcend the plane of mind and will be with that reality. That is the only way. So, how it will happen is all about knowledge by identity. What is the true identity of mind? Knowledge by identity and knowledge by being with it. Brahmavid Brahmeva Bhavati. Being one with the Brahman. So, being one with what? Being one with the gross or subtler. Being one with the subtler principle. And now we have to understand this subtler principle, the Brahma Tattvam, where everything is interrelated. The universality or the individuality, we can say both are interrelated forms of manifestations that is coming out of the same reality. Maybe we can say the microcosmic interpretation and the macrocosmic interpretation, the Jagat and the Jivan. What is the unifying principle of Jagat and Jivan? Is Ishvara, is the Brahma Tattva. Because ultimately the common thread of Ishvara is the between the Jagat and the Jivan is the Ishvara. So any manifestation, see, we can say that the individuality and the universality are interrelated and they are working with or they use the same principle. Bhagavan in Gita says, Matta Paradaram Nanyat Kinjidasti Dhananjaya Mai Sarvavedam Prodam Sutre Maniganaiva. I am the common thread. How it is like the different beads are connected using a thread. Similarly, I am the one who is the essential principle and which is a common principle. Or in other way, Bhagavan in 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita says, I am the Kshatrajnan. And there is only one Kshatrajnan, irrespective of the different Kshetram. Or in the 15th chapter, Bhagavan again says, I am the Purushottaman. I am the Purushan. And Prakriti is the gross. Purushan is the subtle. So, I am the Purna Vastu. I am the infinite truth. When one has got a clarity of this, that person will be able to get freedom in life. When I say freedom in life, freedom from the dvanda, the psychic polarities. Because in life, if you see, always these dualities are there. Good, bad, pleasure, pain, correct? So, when one identifies the true nature as the subtler principle, one will be able to overcome or one will be able to achieve freedom from the psychic polarity, so called as the Dvandvam or the Dvaya Bhavam. And when Dvayam or Dvandvam is there, always there will be Bhayam. So only way is to reach or go towards the Abhayam, and the Abhayam will come when you identify your true nature as the existence, consciousness, bliss principle. And that principle is within all of us, as per Shloki Bhagavatam, Bhagavan Sarvabhudanam Adhyaksho Avastadokha. That principle is the master. Adhyakshan in this context is the master of everything, master of all beings. And that master is allowing the beings to operate, be it listening, be it smelling, be it procreating, be it anything, what not. So, when one has got this understanding and abides in this principle, that is where the freedom from the psychic polarities or dvandva will come. And that is the state of mukti or moksha. Bhagavan in Gita says Brahmi Sthiti, this Sthiti or this state as the Brahmi Sthiti. Correct? Also, Bhagavan says in the context of Bhagavad Gita, 8th chapter, there it is like, what is the difference between Kim Tad Brahma, Kim Adhyatmam, Kim Karma Purushottam. Also the terms like Adibhudam, Adidevam. If you all remember the 8th chapter, Arjuna asked this question and Bhagavan gives a very elaborate description. And there Bhagavan says Brahman is the Sarvagada Chaitanya Tattvam. Brahman is the Abhinna Nimitta Upadana Karanam, as the material and the intelligent cause. Brahman is the macrocosmic principle. Brahman is the Paramatma Tattvam. Brahman is the Tattvam in that acts in total, or we can say it's samashti, the truth of everything. And Atma, Adhyatma, we can say consciousness from the standpoint of an individual or a jiva. We can say it's microcosm or jiva atma, or we can say the part of the whole, an individual, from an individual point of view. Or we can say it's at the level of Vyashti. So that is where the Mahavakyam comes and say there is no difference between the Brahman and Atma. That is where the Mahavakyam says, the first definition says Prajnanam Brahma, Ayam Atma Brahma, Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi. So now, how one should transcend from the gross to subtle? You may ask, how can I run away from my duties? Nobody is asking. Vedanta never says, Vedanta never asks. None of the scriptures say, right? Because even if you see Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan says, Arjuna, you need to, because you are entitled to do that. You cannot run away from your duties. You cannot run away from your swadharmam. So what one has to do is, from karmachari, we have to transcend to a brahmachari. From a gross plain dependence to a subtle plain dependence. We call it as abhay. Abhayam on gross, from there you need to come and take abhayam on the subtle, the refuge. In another way, we can say it's a bhakti towards the Brahman, bhakti towards the higher self, bhakti towards the higher principle. But due to the different traits and vasanas, we ourselves, though we are that big principle, due to the Maya, due to the different influences. So that is where our mind should have the capability and the right attitude to have the prabhati or sharanagati or bhakti with a refined mind. So dependence on the world, from there one has to come towards dependence on the self. One has to transcend. And if you look at in a very practical way, we all, or the human beings, undergo an evolution, the stages of evolution towards perfection happens through 4 stages. At the first stage, everybody is deluded. Basically, the acute identification with the objects, acute identification with the gross plane. acute identification with the body, mind, intellect, sense, names and forms. We create positions, or we inherit positions, or we create assumed personalities out of the names, forms, body, mind, intellect, senses, transactions, etc. Then what we do, we depend on them, we try to get outcomes out of this to make us happy. But at some point of time, we'll understand that there is a non-issue there, because we are completely, or we are constantly deceived by the changing objects, because this life will become a kind of a rat race. Chasing. So what happens? Then the insecurity will come, fear will come. That is where the kripa of Lord comes in the form of nitya anitya vastu vivegam. What is permanent in this life? What is impermanent in life? What is that I should depend upon? Is there a meaning for me to depend on the impermanent? The nitya vastu vivegam bodham, that is the discrimination. Then, as I mentioned, from the gross to subtle, then the feeling or the kind of understanding will creep in such people that, who am I? Am I this changing body, mind, intellect, sense? Can I be like that? Because it's not am I. Can I be? I mean, what is my true identity? Can I be like that? Can I be a mere limited being? So that is where the second state of evolution comes, as the witnessing. That is where one will start going through the avasthatrayam, panchagosham, drigdrishya vivegam, etc. Then we'll start appreciating that change is the only thing that is constant in life. Then the silly question will be asked like, oh, am I a fool to chase these things? Am I or am I do I have the issue of karpanya dosha? That is where the first step, nitya nitya vastu vivegam, is already there. The second stage, called as the dispassion, comes into picture. Dispassion is what? Dispassion is all about decoupling from the impermanent. Decoupling from the impermanent. That itself is dispassion. So now the act of witnessing is happening inside us. And what happens is basically, there the conviction will not come, but the act of easily getting swayed by the transactional plane things will not get affected much. The issues of transactional plane in terms of consistently pulling in, pulling out, and swaying will not happen, because now the logic will be applied. That is where one will also understand that, I cannot depend on these things just for making me happy, because these transactions otherwise also have to do, and the transactions will not guarantee best results. So that is where this kind of revelation will happen. Then the third stage of evolution is act of observing. Act of observing. When I say act of observing the thoughts, act of observing the feelings, act of observing the emotions, act of observing the objects, closely observing the objects, because those objects are always changing behavior is there. So that is where some sort of pausing will happen in life. Hold on, Let me look it in a deeper way, not getting into the swaying mode. So from objects to the observer will happen. This is the third stage. And fourth stage is basically through the purification and through the Kripa, Shastra, Guru, Atma Kripa, every Kripa, Ishvara Kripa should happen. And the mental purification will also happen by this time. What happens is basically the abidance, the complete abidance in that self. Shruti says it's Brahmi Sthiti. This is a systematic and a structured way. And again, this is not something like, entry gate or something like that. It is all naturally happening. Permanent and effortlessly happening. And Shastra Grandham says this is the state of a Jivan Mukta or a Nitya Mukta. So, abidance is the last stage. That is where the systematic and structural way. And again, abidance in what? Abidance in the subtler thing. Because this is happening out of the knowledge that one gains in a structured or a systematic way. So through Nitya Anitya Vastu Vivegam, through dispassion, and ultimately one will start looking oneself as the observer of the objects. And the last stage is the state of abidance. So what happens otherwise also, if you logically look, every experience that we have in life, there are two things. One is the changing objects. Every experience that we have in life will have changing objects. For example, you are interacting with somebody at this point of time. There are changing objects, so called as Vishaya. And another thing that we are not appreciating is the continuous, unchanging experience of isness. Are you all with me? When we interact, the changes happening, so called as the changing objects, or we can say it is the Vishayam. We deal with different topics, different Vishayam on a daily basis. But one thing behind the objects is the continuous, unchanging experience of isness. And that continuous, unchanging experience of isness is the one that lends existence, is the one that gives the Chetana Tattvam. This isness is continuous, your topics are changing. So now the question is, should I identify myself with the continuous changing topics, or should I identify myself with the continuous unchanging experience of isness, where that principle is lending existence to all the topics that we are having in life? The question is, should I identify myself with the cosmic world, or should I identify myself with the conscious intelligence? Should I identify myself or my journey in life to become things, or becoming in life, versus being? So that is where the Taittiriya Mantram comes to us, Om Brahmavid apnoti param tadeshabhukta satyam jnanam anandam brahma yo veda nihidam guhayam parame vyoman. So ashnude sarvan kaman saha brahmana avivesthiti. So the knower of Brahman attains the highest truth, the highest principle. And the knower of that truth attains Satyam, Jnanam, Anandam as the inner nature. And that person who has got all the qualities, when we say the 4 stages of evolution with all the Kripa coming, that soul will discover this self and will get delighted. Again, in the Bhasha of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, yastu atmaridireva syad atmatruptascha manava atminyevacha sandushtat tasya karyam na vidyate. The one who sees the true source of happiness within, the true source of potential within. Atmaridi, Atmatrupti, Atma Sandushtara will find or will discover and delight in that self. Discover the happiness as well as the abundance within, instead of getting attached with the sense objects. What happens? That drains our energy, because we have to use the psychic energy when we deal with the objective world, objects or transaction. It doesn't mean that we should not do that. Instead of finding happiness from those sense world objects, by inherently one has to be happy, because it is not a blind statement saying inherently you need to be happy. You are that. There is no question of you not having or possessing these capabilities. Let me use this as a context. We will start with verse number 66. Though we covered last week, but we will use 66 and 67 for today's session. Sravanadi viruddipta Jnanagni paritapita Jiva sarvamalan mukta Swarnavada udyate swayam. So Sravanadivi Uddipta Jnanagni paritapita Jiva sarvamalan mukta swayam Swarna vadyodade. So knowledge is attained through how? It is attained through the purifications. Very important. The jiva becoming cleansed. The jiva being away from the impurities. The analogy used here is how the fire cleanses the dirt. The fire of knowledge destroys the ignorance. So what one has to have, the ways of jnana sambadhanam is mentioned here as the 3 things. That is, first is Shravanam, reasoning of the truth heard. Listening of the truth, which is there in the scriptures. It is not a new truth. And that truth is explained by a guru who is Shrotriyan, Brahmanishtan, heard the truth which is there in the scriptures through a guru who is a Brahmajnani. This is the Shravanam. Then second is what? Second is the Mananam. Do the reasoning of the truth which is heard. You use your yukti, manana. And third is what? The deep reflection or the contemplation on what has been heard and what has been reasoned by yourself. This is called as the dhyanam, otherwise nididhyasanam. So one has to have the capability to cleanse the mind, or one should have the discipline to cleanse the mind. So what happens when this cleansing of the mind happens, and these three ways of jnana sampadana, that is Sravana, Manana, Dhyanam, the egocentric personality, the Jiva Atma, will understand its own limitations and rediscovers that my true nature is the subtle principle. I am not the gross principle. I am the embodiment of peace. I am the embodiment of compassion. I am the embodiment of prosperity. I am the embodiment of infinity. So that is where gross is the freedom. So subtle is the freedom. Gross is bondage. When one identifies with the gross, obviously there is bondage, because gross has got limitations. Gross cannot be beyond that name or a form, whereas subtle is the substratum of everything, and that substratum has all the potential to go beyond the finite or limited capabilities. So then the jnani rightly identifies the nijasthiti as the purnatvam, and with that knowledge, with that energy, a jnani operates in the world. So but the world is designed in such a way that by inherent nature Brahman is bliss, but the Brahman is covered or hidden behind the names and forms. So that is where the notion of I or I-ness or mine-ness, the mamakaratvam, that is the typical characteristic of a jiva. And what happens? The Maya really creates the mode of perception in which the individuals will start thinking that I am the one who is enabling this to happen. Individual cognition is perceived as the real by Jiva due to the influence of Maya. We call it as avidya or ajnanam, etc. But one thing we need to understand here is, again, when we say ajnanam or ajnanena avradam jnanam, if the knowledge is covered by ajnanam, one thing we need to understand is that the jiva is not able to experience the totality of the perception. As I mentioned before, when you deal with anything, you can see a set of objects or vishay. But what is there behind all the objects? There is an unchanging consciousness. Are you all with me? So, in total, any experience will have the dimensions of two things. One is basically the different vishayam, the different objects that you deal, and which are not true, which doesn't carry any much weightage. But what is important is the unchanging reality that gives Chedana Tattvam to all objects, to all Vishayam, to all transactions. So when we say Ajnanam, let us understand that the Jiva is knowingly dropping the second dimension due to the influence of Maya. The jiva simply do not reach the experience of the totality of perception. So then what happens? This is a lopsided kind of thinking. That is where the duality is created. That is where the dvandvam comes into picture. That is where Bhagavan says in the Bhagavad Gita again, this is a kingly science, Raja Vidya, Raja Guhyam, knowledge of the great secrets. That self is the reality that shines everything. And you should know that self. Self knowledge alone helps to realize the absolute truth. That self knowledge is the kingly science, and that only can attain perfection in this world. That is the highest wisdom. So Bhagavan Krishna also said, you know yourself. That is enough, because to know God we must first know our true self. That is the only way for perfection and freedom. And towards that, the first victory, the first milestone is what? Victory over the turbulent mind. Antakarana Shuddhi. I will stop here before taking any questions. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyade. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.